Welcome back. Today's video is going to be focused mostly on cleaning up the code a little bit and adding some more CSS style to this application. So to get started, I'm going to go straight to the code and open up our routes. The first thing I want to change is I've been using this error handling method of just writing the HTTP status code and a little bit of text for the user to let them know that there's an internal server error. But this has been copied and pasted all throughout our routes file. And to clean it up a little bit, I thought I would go to utils, create errors.go here. And I want to make a function to do this for us, so we can just copy that function call into all of these locations instead of the actual write calls. So to do that, this is going to be in the utils package. We're going to need to import the net HTTP package because we're going to use this response writer. So make this function. I'm going to call it internal server error. It's going to take one of those response writers, and all it's going to do is write the status code to the header and then write that little bit of text. So every time that we had that originally, we can replace with utils.internal server error and pass in the response writer. So I'll go ahead and fix this throughout the code. And that's a small change, but it cleans it up a little bit, and it makes it to where if we want to change that response text somewhere, or even put a styled page in the response, we just change it here instead of having to change it in every single location. So that's definitely a bit nicer. The next thing I wanted to change was in the models. I don't know why, but I originally had the model represented by the string key into the Redis database. After thinking about it, it seems way more convenient to use the integer ID here and do the, oops, didn't mean to change that, and for all of these access points to just create that string key from the integer ID. The reason here is that we use the integer ID more throughout the application, and I think it makes more sense to store that in the model representation itself. Because for instance, in the routes, it's the integer ID of the user that we're storing in the session. So getting the object, getting the user from the database by that key is the easiest operation. By the integer ID is the easiest operation. So this is a pretty easy fix. We know that the ID is an int64, and yeah, when the user is returned here, we just return that ID. Here's where it's going to be a little bit different. We need to construct this key, which we can use funct sprintf. We know that the key is user. We'll pass in the ID. Now another common approach here is to actually store these values associated with the user in this struct and pull it all up whenever you grab the user object from the database. And then these attribute getters would be a lot more efficient. They would just be pulling it directly from this user object. I'm not going to do that, partially for simplicity in this situation, but also because if the username or the hash changes somewhere else in the application, it wouldn't update your reference to the user object in place. And I would rather just have Redis be the authority for what the state of the application is. So every time we want to use one of these attributes, we're going to pull it right from Redis then and there, usually during that request. It wouldn't make a big difference in this application, but just as a matter of convention, this is what I'm going to prefer to do. I realized I started writing this and we don't need to use that here. This is the one case where it's simplified much more because it's now just user ID. I'll add a nil error just so we don't change this function signature. But yeah, our user object already has the ID, so we don't need to look that up. Here, I'll use that key. So now I'm just creating that string key, passing that to Redis so we can get the username attribute from it. I'll do the same for this, the hash. Let's make sure it doesn't impact anything else. So this doesn't look like it's impacted. Oh, get user by ID is simplified a bit because now we don't have to do that. We just pass in the ID into the user object. Get user by username doesn't change at all because it just calls this get user by ID. Let's see, authenticate user doesn't change at all. And register user doesn't change either. Now, nothing that uses the user object should depend on the key being there or the ID. So the only changes to this we should have to make are in here. But I also want to make the same change to the update struct. So it's also going to be with an ID. Same thing here, we're just going to return it, pass the ID to create the struct. Same situation here, we need to create the string key when we're getting attributes from it. So this will be update, the ID, update.id. Yeah. So let's replace that. Getting the user is going to be the same. We need to create that key again because we don't have it in our struct. Everything else about this function stays the same because the get user ID was what changed to construct the user. So get all updates. What do I need to change here? This actually will need to change because when we get all of these update IDs from the updates object, oh, these are both going to need to change. Easiest way to handle this would probably be to make a helper function that abstracts these a bit. And I guess really these functions, everything is the same in them except for what key they're grabbing the data from. So having both of these functions is a little bit excessive. Oh, anyway, this, when we grab these update IDs, it grabs them as strings. And we need to construct the object with an integer. Go has a package for converting strings. See if I can remember this off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it's string conv. So now what I want to do is create a helper function. I'll call it get updates. We'll call it query updates. That's kind of what it's going to be doing. It'll take a key, a string. That should be the only thing that it needs. And it's going to return our array of update pointers and our error, potential error. Yeah, copy all the code from one of the other ones. And then in this, we're just going to pass whatever key we need into this. So then I should be able to replace this function with query updates and pass this key into it. Because functionally they'll be the same at that point. And then this function will be the same if I just pass in this user specific updates key. Yeah, that should work. So get rid of all that code. So this simplifies things a little bit, but now we have to deal with this whole string ID situation. So we got all these IDs in an array. Got the response allocated. But this isn't the real ID, this is a string ID here. And the real ID, I have to use the string conv. The function we want, I believe, is a to I. Which is going to convert a string that has an integer in it. Which is exactly what we have, this array of integer strings. It's going to convert it to an actual integer. Along with potential error if this conversion goes wrong. It shouldn't, because we're only putting integers into Redis, but it could. So we'll handle that real quick. If it goes wrong, then we'll return a nil update. I should probably add the keyword return here. We'll return a nil update and we'll return whatever error it is. Probably be a good idea to be explicit about what this error is so that something catching it knows what's up. But for now, I'll just say, hey, there was an error. And then when we construct this updates struct pointer, now we can just pass in that ID and it behaves exactly the way that it should behave. if I'm not overlooking anything, it should run as is. I want to go ahead and check that before I go any further. So go run main.go. Aha. So in the update file on line 56, cannot use ID type int as type int64 in the field value. So let's open up our code, go to line 56, and what it's saying is we can't use this integer as returned from the string_com function in this field value for our struct pointer. And that's because it's an int64, which we can cast right there. So let's see if this works. Now it looks like we aren't getting that error. That's a good sign. Let's go to the browser, do this check as always. So I need to log in. I had the username Davy without a password, so I can log in. Great. The next thing I want to change is to fix a bug in our user registration code. And first I'll show you why it's a bug and what that looks like. So we open up the browser, go to this register page we have. So I'm already registered on this site using the username Davy, and currently I have an empty password. But this register handler will actually let me register again with a new password, and then I can log in with that new password. So that's a pretty big security vulnerability for a login or for a registration to overwrite the previous password. It means if I wanted to log in as you, all I have to do is register as your username and then use my own password. So that's obviously not going to cut it. To fix that, I'll need to go to this users handler here. When we're creating a new user, we want to make sure that the username doesn't already exist. This shouldn't be too bad. We'll just say exists error equals client, the Redis client, dot h exists. It's a method in Redis. So what this is going to do is it's going to say on our user by username hash table, this is hash object, does the username exist? If the username has been set from a previous registration on this hash object, it would be set to the ID. We don't care what it's set to, we just care that it's set, because that means that this username is already used, and we need to return some kind of error. If it exists, that'll be, this variable will be true. So if exists, we need to return nil and then an error. This will probably be a good time to create a new error. I forgot to type the return keyword again. Okay, we need to create a new error because this is something that we're going to want to be able to catch and probably return like, hey, username already taken. So error, I'll just say username taken. Cool. So now if we're trying to create a new user, this is going to stop us if that username that they're trying to create it with has already been taken. So that would be returned from our register user function too. Let's see how hard it would be to have our register handler show them that error. So that would happen here. Yeah, I don't think it'd be too hard. I think we can just say if error equals that error that we just created. And we need to return, we need to render the register template if it's the username taken error. We're also going to want to return from that so it doesn't do this redirect after rendering this. And then exactly the same way that we did it for the login template. So the login has these error messages shown. All we do is pass a string in the data parameter of the execute template function. So I'm going to do that here. And yeah, I'll just pass username taken. So now I have to update this register template. I'm going to do exactly what we did for the login. Copy this condition. Put it in the same spot. So if you don't remember how this works, if the data that we passed, which is that string error, so if it exists, then there's an error, and we'll just create a new div of the class name error, which just contains that string. So that's it. Now when they're trying to register, if the username's already taken, they'll get that error instead of being able to overwrite the existing user. So let's make sure that that works. Go to the terminal, stop the server with Control-C, start it, wait a second to make sure that it's not going to fail while it's building. Then we'll go to the browser, go to register. Now I'll try to register as Davy. Doesn't matter what I enter for the password. Yeah, username taken for Davy. And Alice is a registered user too, so username taken for Alice. What about Bob? Username was not taken for Bob. So now we can log in as Bob. Cool, so looks like that's all working. So now there's another bug I want to show you. We go back to the browser. We're logged in as Bob right now. We'll go to Bob's status updates. So you see how we have this post update form. So we'll try to post something and it's gonna fail. It's gonna fail because of this method not allowed. And that's because this form is trying to post to this /Bob method, and there is no post handler for that, so we get method not allowed. If I go to the code, yeah, the only post handler for posting updates we have is on this index. And I could change this to use the username instead of allowing it to post to the index. That might make sense. I think probably an easier fix would just be to go to this code, change the action. Just change the action to be the root address, the index handler. So now this post, even if we're on the slash, it's gonna post to our index. So I guess I can test that out real quick. Stop this server, start it again, open the browser, reload this page. Cool. So now we've written our update even though we were on our page. Now there's like a weird situation where I'm logged in as Bob and I go to Davy's handler. That's funny. So I didn't even anticipate this happening. I'll go to the terminal. I'm going to stop the server and then open up the Redis CLI. Let's list which keys we have. So we have quite a few users here, even though I'm pretty sure there's only Davy, Bob, and Alice. Let's get some information about these users. So Davy was user 1, Alice was user 2, and then Davy was user 3. Bob was user 4. So Davy is in there twice because I did that example where I showed you that I was able to register even though the username was already taken. So that's a bug. That's some data inconsistency right there. The real inconsistency is that it overwrote this user by username hash, and that's what we use in our get user by username function. Like that's how we look up users by their username. So when I registered the second time, it wrote my new user ID into this hash. So h get all user by username. You see Davy is set to 3 when it should be set to 1. I can correct that manually. Oh, right. To include the key if I'm going to set this to this hash object. Okay. So now if I exit, start the server again, go to the browser and reload. There we go. So now Davy, the username, is still associated with the first instance of Davy that I created. I could go ahead and delete the other one, but I'm eventually going to flush all this data at some point anyway. Anyway, what I wanted to show you originally before we found that little hidden bug was I'm logged in as Bob on Davy's page, and I'm going to leave an update. But, you know, it was Bob's update. So it shows on Bob's update page. And nothing was changed on Davy's page. And that's reasonable because, you know, I don't want Bob to make updates on Davy's behalf. So Bob really shouldn't even get this post update form when he's looking at Davy's page. That doesn't make any sense. So I should change that. You know, I want some condition for rendering this form. I could just just make something up. I'll say if yeah, we'll say that we're going to pass a Boolean variable to the template, and it's just going to be called display form. And that's it. So if this display form variable is true, then we're going to show this form. Otherwise, you know, no form. We'll just have the updates. So now we have to figure out how to get that variable and pass it in. For the index handler, I'm okay with always displaying the form. So that's the easy case. Display form Boolean. It's always true. Cool. Now we have the case for when you're on a specific user page. Now what? So we've got the user ID for the page that we're on, right? Because we're getting that from the mux path variables. We get the username. We look up the user by the username for the page that we're on. And then we're going to get their ID. But we don't have the user ID for the current session. So what we can do is, if those two match, then we'll display the form. If they don't match, the current session user ID doesn't match the user ID of the page that we're on, then we don't display the form. So that's pretty easy. Trying to find some code where I've retrieved, oh, right here. Oops. Okay. I guess I'll do this first before we do anything else here. We need to get the current user ID from the session. That's pretty easy. We grab the session. It's standard. We get this untyped user ID because session values are empty interface objects. So it doesn't have a type associated with it. I can't use user ID because I use that down here. We'll go ahead and say current user ID. If it's not okay, like somehow a non-integer value ended up in this session variable, that should never happen, but we'll return a server error. And I think that's it. Then this display form can just be, you know, it's true if the current user ID equals the user ID for the page. Yeah, let's see if that works. Go back to this terminal, stop our server, start our server. There's a bug. I guess I lapsed on my template understanding. I was used to using Jinja templates from Python, whereas you use end for and end if, and Golang, the templates are just end for everything. That was an easy bug to fix. And go back to the terminal, start it. Shouldn't be any errors. Let's go to the browser. There we go. We're logged in as Bob, so when we're looking at Davy's page, all we see are Davy's updates. We don't see that the form. We also don't see it on Alice's page, but we do see it on our own page as Bob, so that's cool. And then we do see it on the all updates. Great, so now we've fixed some of the major bugs in our application. There is still one situation. I guess I forgot to bring this up. You know, in this new user method, we're checking if the username exists, and then, you know, we're bailing pretty early if it does exist. There's like a race condition where if two users try to sign up with the same username and somehow they both get past this point at the same time, but they haven't, you know, neither of them has written to this, there will be a race condition where they're both able to sign up with the same username because the function didn't reject it, because when they both first started to sign up, that username didn't exist, and then they get through to the point where it allows it, but they've just overwritten the last one to sign up basically will have that username, and the other one will, their user ID won't be accessible. Their hash won't be the same because user ID accessed by this username. The only way to fix that, really, you have to do some method of locking in this situation, or we could try to set this hash earlier on. I still think a lock would be the most logical way to approach this, which in Go we could use channels to restrict to one Go routine the ability to register users. That's a pretty common design pattern in Go. Or we could use a mutex and actually lock the ability to create users, and that would stop this race condition. I feel like that's it's more than I want to go into in this video, maybe even more than I want to go into in this video series, but I just wanted to make you aware that that is a situation you should be on the lookout. If you were using this in the wild, like if you were actually going to run this as a part of your web application, that would be a situation that could cause you problems. Now I'll add a handler that allows users to log out, because I think that would be a useful feature for users to have. So let's go to our routes, and I'm just going to copy the code that we use to create our login handler. I'm going to call it logout. Change the name of the function. So now we're creating a new endpoint, a new route on our application called logout. And if the user makes an HTTP GET request to that, we'll do the code to log them out. Copy that function signature. So how do we log them out? Well, how did we log them in the first place? That was in this login post handler. We created this session variable called user ID. We assign that to the session. So I guess a good way to log them out would be to delete that from the session. So that should work. I guess we can go ahead and test it. Open up the terminal, stop this, start it, go back to our browser. Let's see, we're logged in as Bob. What happens when we go to log out? Oh yeah, we should probably redirect to the login page or something. But it did log out because now we're given the login page. We can log in as Bob. Then go ahead and stop the terminal, go back to the code, implement this redirect. I'm going to redirect them to the login page. Cool. I guess I can prove that that works really quick. Start the server again, go back to the browser, logged in, and we log out, we go back to the login page. Cool. So now I want to add some style to this because this page is looking pretty simple. Log in as Davy. Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to edit some of the CSS, maybe some of the HTML. We'll go to the editor. It's going to be our index that we're editing here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put everything inside of another container called main. Now I'm not a designer, this isn't my usual thing, so don't take any of this advice to mean like this is the best practice for HTML and CSS, but I know how to make this look better than this plain black and white page that we have right now. So let's go to the CSS now. What I want to do with this main element is just set a width for it. I'll say max width is like 640 pixels or something. Be cool if it were centered. So do like margin, no vertical margin, and an auto horizontal margin. This selector isn't going to be valid anymore since I just put those divs that it was selecting for inside of this main element. So let's copy that main at the top. Something to that effect. Except I don't want it to be. I don't want there to be a width on this because the width is going to be constrained in the container, the main container. I don't want a margin either. That's cool. Let's say that the body of the page itself actually will have a background color, I don't know, gray. And these divs will be white. I'll keep the border. I don't know. I'm just making all this stuff up. So let's go ahead and, since I made changes to the template, I want to restart the server. Now I'll just switch back to the browser. That doesn't look too bad. There's still some changes that I'd like to make. For instance, these divs. I'm gonna add a margin to the bottom. Say like one EM. Yeah, add a little bit of space to them. I don't like this form the way it looks. Let's see what we can do about that. And I'm going to put the whole thing inside of a div here. Create an ID for that. So now I can style that form a bit. I'm actually going to make the text align be right. And I'm going to make the text area fill up the whole space. And maybe put a little bit of a margin on the bottom of that. And since I changed the template, again, gotta reload back to the browser. Oh, right. So because I put that in a div, it's all getting this white background. That's not necessarily what I want. I'll fix that real quick. Let's give a class to these updates so that this can select on that class instead of div, because that was the problem before, is that this was being selected with it. Cool. I mean, that looks better. How does it look on a specific page? It's not bad. I probably would change space a bit. Make that half, so that the button's a little bit more closely associated with the input. That's awkward. I forget how to change the resize of text fields. And Google that real quick. Okay, so I think what I need to do on this text area is do resize vertical. Help if I spelled vertical right. Go back here. Cool. Now you can vertically resize it, not horizontally. Man, this is good enough for me. I guess one more thing that I'll do is here we've got where it says, you know, username root and then the update body. I want to make the username a link. And that link is going to go to the user's page. So I changed the template, so I'll reload again. Cool. Doesn't make sense on this page, but I feel like it makes a little bit more sense here, where I can then go in and say like, ooh, what has Bob been writing? You know, what are Alice's updates? Oh yeah, we added that logout handler, but the user doesn't have any way to access it. So let's go to the editor. I'll create another element here. Let's call it nav. It's kind of a navigational bar. Not sure if that's correct, but that's what I called it. So then I'll make a link to the logout, and you know, it'll just say logout. And I can style that a bit. Guess I can give it a border at the bottom. And yeah, we'll make it white with some similar padding to the updates. Not sure if this is gonna look right at all. I did change the template, so the usual, reload. It's not bad, except that there is some space here. The space is because the body probably has some padding or margin to it. Let's do a style reset. See that nothing has any margin or pattern or padding. Now if I reload it, a little bit awkward because this got moved down. Why did that get moved down? What does it look like normally? That looks good. That does not look good. Let's go to the editor. I mean, I could just add a margin at the bottom of this update form. So if this exists, you know, just say margin bottom is like 1 EM. Oh yeah, that's not bad. I'll go ahead and make this nav a text align to the right so it's over here, our little logout. Make sure we can log out. Oh yeah, our login and our register pages kind of look bad. I don't even have any CSS for those. You know what? I'm not going to worry about those. I feel like this video has already covered probably more than I intended to, and we now have something that looks okay-ish. It's way better than it was originally, I'll put it that way. Well, I feel pretty good about this application at this point. It's not quite perfect, but for as few videos as it took to make this, and as small of a code base as it is, this works for me. I probably won't make any more videos on this series. I will be making other series though. If you do have any questions, or if you'd like me to cover anything on here more in depth, then I might do a video to, recap any questions or feedback that I get from this series. But otherwise, I'm going to move on to something else, so be on the lookout. Bye.